ago. Francesca Fiorani, you are a professor of art history at the University of Virginia, and you are the author of The Marvel of Maps, Art, Cartography, and Politics in Renaissance Italy. You are also interested in the intersection of art, science, and technology in the early modern period. And your latest book is The Shadow Drawing, How Science Taught Leonardo How to Paint. Francisca, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
So, Francisca, I see that you have a double life. You live in modern United States, the 21st century, but you also live at the same time in the Renaissance era. So I'm just curious to find out about your other life. But before we get there, I know that you grew up in Italy. Can you tell us a little bit about the earlier you, when you were deciding what to do with your life, when you were in the equivalent of Italy of high school? How do you transition into your field of expertise?
Yes, so yes, I'm Italian. I was born in Rome, grew up in Rome, went to school in Rome, both for K-12 and then at the university. I attended the University of Rome, La Sapienza, and got my PhD here. And I think I was interested in art since a very early age. I think traveling with my parents, who also were always interested in art, brought that interest. One of my early recollection was as a child, we were traveling to Venice, and I must have been 6 or 7. And I saw a painting, a Renaissance painting that looked really bright. The colors looked really fresh, as if they were still wet. Most likely it was a painting that had just been restored. But as a child, I did what you are not supposed to do in a museum. I climbed on a chair and tried to touch the painting, which looked to me so fresh. So I had that curiosity for the making of art and how it was made since I was a kid. And remember another episode, this was later, that was a middle school trip. We went to Florence. And in Italy, you learn art history in school as one of the many subjects. That's kind of unique to Italy. Many other places do not do that. And so I did learn about Leonardo. I did learn about his master, Verrocchio, and that gets really close to the topic of the book, the last book I wrote. But I didn't know all their works. I remember that traveling with my teacher from middle school, we arrived in front of a work of art that I had never seen. And right away, I knew that it was a work by Leonardo's master. And so that sort of gave me a sense that I liked art and I knew how to look at it. I did not know that there was a profession such as to be an art historian. And so, but then when I had to decide what to do in college, I have to say that in Italy it's different also than in the US. Or in Canada, when you enter college, you have to decide right away the subject you are studying. And so I had to make that decision right away that I wanted to follow a humanities track, and that track was art history. So I knew I liked that, but it was an instinctive choice, and only later I discovered there's actually a profession for it. Yeah.
But I find it that it is easy to fall in love with art and history and architecture if you grew up in Rome. I mean, you just walk out and you see the Colosseum and you see, I don't know, all these huge cathedrals that are hundreds of years old, and you have all these monuments everywhere. I mean, I went to Rome and there's all these Fontana di Trevi and I don't know what else. I forgot all the monuments, but of course you can, yes, in your everyday life, without even making an effort, you are learning every day about history and all the paintings, and even people take art as a regular part of their life, as opposed to in North America where you study art. There in Rome, art is just what happens every day. So, so you study art and you did your PhD. At what moment did you decide that you would like to move to the United States?
Yeah, that was happened by chance. It was at the very end of my PhD. I was finishing up my PhD, and the opportunity came to move to the US. And it was a major move, and I had to kind of start all over again, recreating my contact and establishing myself, finding a job at the university, and so forth. I think one of the biggest adjustment was precisely the lack of art around me all the time.
Mm.
And I didn't realize how important that was for me until I did not have it any longer. And so that was a big adjustment. I ended up in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is an absolutely lovely town, a university designed by Thomas Jefferson and inspired by Italian architecture. So a particularly beautiful campus, and that campus, that town became home very quickly, and I have a fantastic life there. But there is no question that there was a big change moving from Rome to Charlottesville. Yes.
And how about your English? Your English is beautiful. How much was there a struggle to adjust not only to a new culture but also to a new language?
Yeah, that was hard. That was and at one level, the minute I open my mouth, people know that I'm Italian, so the accent is there and it's not going to disappear. and and so that's just the way it is. And
But
but
it suits you quite well since you are a teacher of art history and you focus on the Renaissance. Then it's just an added bonus that my teacher who teaches about the Renaissance in Italy, it's Italian. I feel
yes.
students should pay even extra for that.
Yeah, students love it. I mean, they love the accent, and then they so I teach them about Italian artists, and they all have odd names, and they're really worried. Oh, well, we are mispronouncing the names. And I tell them, relax. I'm mispronouncing English all the time, so just relax on mispronouncing Italian names, right? So it creates a really a lively and friendly atmosphere in class. Yes.
Okay, and then through your career, you decided to write your first book, The Marvel of
Yes.
Maps. What inspired you to? I mean, I assume that your career as a teacher is busy enough. What inspired you now to write a book?
Yes. So I've been a specialist of sounds, particularly Italian sounds, but always the relationship between and science. Art and sciences are completely different fields today, separated, different training, different careers. But in the Renaissance, they were much more connected. And so I was really, really interested in those connections. And maps, the making of maps, the use of maps was precisely one of those areas in which I could study fantastic images, works of art that were made by people who were both into technology and science as well as art. And, uh, and so part of our job is to teach, but another part is to write books. And it's a real part in our job description. Produce new research, new knowledge, and share that knowledge with others, with colleagues, first of all, with our students first, then with colleagues, and then with the larger public. So that's how that interest in maps translated then into the writing of that book.
And could you define what is the early modern period in years? What makes it early Yeah, what from year 1 year? Which year to what year is the the early modern period?
Roughly from 1400 to 1600,
I see.
roughly. It could
Okay.
be 1350 to 1650, but let's say the 15th and 16th century, I would say. Yes. Mhm.
Okay, and so that brings us now to your present book, The Shadow Drawing, How Science Taught Leonardo How to Paint. What inspired you to write this book in particular?
Yeah, that, I mean, the fascination with Leonardo is long-standing. So I've been fascinated with this man, the ultimate Renaissance man, since really I was a student at the University of Rome. Um, what troubled me about Leonardo was the view that he was a dual genius. Everybody knows that he is a genius and as an artist, the man who painted the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper. And everybody knows that he's a genius as a scientist, the man who created in his mind, imagined in his mind the parachute, the flying machine. But the current view is that he was an artist first, who trained as an artist in Florence as a youth, and then later in life, in his late 30s, around 40, he suddenly discovered science and became a scientist. And this view of a dual Leonardo just troubled me deeply. And the book shows that we cannot understand Leonardo if we don't see him as a scientist throughout his career. From the very beginning, the scientist and the artist were one and the same person. In a way, he never became a scientist because he was one all along. And that's what the book shows. Mm.
And was he a genius at his time? Because as far as I know, his notebooks and writings were only made public after his death. And we mostly know him because of the Mona Lisa, but the Mona Lisa became famous due to a whole bunch of bizarre accidents that the painting went through. Otherwise, it probably would be one or more of the hundreds of paintings in the Louvre Museum. So I wonder
Yes.
how much notoriety he had at his own time, as opposed to now that everyone knows the name da Vinci. Was he, and how did he earn a living at that time as an artist, as a scientist? What was his place in society at that moment?
Right. So this is very interesting. So he was famous during his lifetime. He became famous. Yeah, he was certainly famous, and he was famous as a great guest at a dinner party. It was great fun to have around. He had great stories to tell. He was witty, he was smart, he was quick on his feet in his thinking. So he was just the kind of dinner guest you want. And so he was sought after dukes and princes and popes. Now, these patrons also wanted things from him, right? Some wanted, war machines, others wanted paintings, others wanted costumes for performances. So he could do a lot of different things. Then he was famous for all of them. The problem is that he really had a hard time to bring things to completion. And it just, for him, it was more important the process of discovery than the outcome of that discovery. And so the writing is a great example of it. He left us, I mean, we have now about over 4,000 pages of his writings. But people calculated, scholars before me calculated that that is only maybe half or even a third of what he actually wrote. So we are talking about over 10,000 pages of writing. Not a single word of what he wrote got ever published. he planned many books and finished none. So what we have are this incredible amount of writings that has no comparison with any other artist of the Renaissance, but that is all at the level of draft. And so what do you do with it? It's very hard to deal with it. And on top of that, he wrote backwards, not from left. He was left-handed. It was left-handed, and that's how left-handed people write if you don't correct them, right?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. When I read that in your book, I said,
Yes.
why would someone would do that? Okay.
Yeah.
And so, being that he wrote so much, I wonder, how do you do the research for this book to find out about his history and life? Did you actually went back to some of his notebooks, or do you rely on the work of some other authors that have written about him before?
Right. Yes, a combination of all of those. So to write about Leonardo, you have first of all to read a lot, because a lot has been written on him. And then, of course, you have to familiarize yourself with the notebooks. And there are critical editions, so it's easier to study them now, but you also have to learn how to read his handwriting. You have to learn how to evaluate what it is that you are writing, what kind of draft are you reading. Then you have to look at the works. And that was perhaps the most exhilarating part of my research, because I was lucky enough that I could look at all his paintings very up close. That is, without their frames, without their protective glasses, often in conservation labs, together with museum directors or curators and conservators. So I was able to give such a close look to his painting technique, and then attempt to learn how he painted and what was he thinking every time he put down a brush stroke. That was an absolutely incredible journey, and took many years to be completed, because, as you can imagine, his paintings are among the most guarded works in the entire world, right? So it was a big enterprise. Often I had to fly especially to meet a special day, a special time in a special museum, when a special team will come up to make it possible to look at those works up close.
Wow, amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
so for the listeners, if you could summarize the book, how would you summarize it?
I summarized that Leonardo was a scientist from the very beginning. Yes, right. That in order to understand his science, we have to understand his shadow drawings, because those drawings are the tools that made it possible for him to paint the human soul. And that is what actually he wanted to be remembered for. Not the flying machine, not the the guns and war machines that he created, but what his legacy, what he really wanted to be remembered was his ability to paint the smallest shifts of people's mind. And so really to make visible what we feel and think through painting.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, could you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can people find it, buy it? In fact, do you mind reaching behind you and flashing it for the camera?
Sure.
This is
Sure.
amazing.
Here it is.
Okay.
Here it is.
Okay.
The
So
shadow drawing, how Leonardo, I'm sorry, I'll start again. The shadow drawing, how science taught Leonardo how to paint. And it came out just about a month ago, like 3 weeks ago. And you can find it on Amazon and or on other online bookshops. And if you want to read more about it, there were a number of reviews came out, and I'd like to recall just two. One on the Wall Street Journal that came out a couple of weeks ago, and one in the New York Times that came out just last week.
Perfect. Okay, I will add all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
That's my pleasure. Thank you so much.